I'm not too sure without the history that you have, they listen the same.
I think I'm one of those people who always has to learn from making those mistakes. So you could have told me this is the right way to do it. I never would have listened. I had to go through it. I have to screw up to learn. That's how I've always been. So I do think I have a lot of experience with doing things the wrong way as far as training. PEDs, like I was super reckless with training in the beginning. It was just maxing out all the time, trying to kill myself in the gym every deadlift day. And same way with PEDs. There was no cycles. There was no thought. It was just take everything, take whatever. The cycle was, I joke, it was 3 years. It was just, that's, the cycle went on. It just went on forever. And these are the kind of things like, there wasn't the education back then that there is now. People weren't talking about it. So all of this makes a huge difference. And it's just, now I do feel like I can kind of pass that on to the younger generations because I've been the young, reckless kid. And now I'm, in my 30s and life's changed immensely.
Yeah, I remember somebody, I can't remember who it was now, but it was as I was coming up that I was talking to about steroids. And I said, man, how many cycles you been on? And this is one. And it started in like 1969. And I was like fucking 86. And so it's like just one full blast type of cycle, which, for a long period of time, it was, at least for myself, 8 weeks on, 8 weeks off. It was whatever that norm was. And then that kind of just bleeds into, just all of it, which we were talking before about how you came in at a time period where there's been different phases of acquiring PEDs, right? Yes. So it's where and it was interesting to hear Rick Collins talk about this at the Swiss Symposium, because I've just kind of known in my mind because I lived through it, but to hear somebody else kind of talk it all out in like a history perspective, is it used to be stuff that would be like smuggled out of real labs, like from Ciba Labs or, whoever it was, somebody would like, or just sold, like some corporate managers like selling pallets out the back door, and it'd be like rugby D-ball and stuff like that when I first came in. So it's 100% legit. It's probably before your time came in. And then then the class changed. It went from being like a misdemeanor more or less to being a class 1 drug. Well, then that all stopped. And then it started coming from Mexico. So then the testosterone and all this other stuff comes through, and that lasted for whatever time period it was. And then the war on drugs, Reagan or whoever started that whole thing, that stopped. And then it was like dry as fuck. And then it's for me, it kind of, in my time period when I was lifting it was cattle implants, man. It was like finding whatever you could find, to be able to get through. And then it started to come from like Taiwan, like Thai D-ball. That might be when you started to come in, somewhere around that time. It'd be that in China, the powders there. And then now it's a whole different level where, everybody's making their own shit. But it was hard. Like at one point it was super hard to get, right? And then as time's progressed, it's become way easier to get, but you also don't really know what the hell you're getting either.
Well, I think when I was coming up, it was all coming from China.
Yeah.
It was like powders from China that people were making, they were cooking with. So that's kind of my time period. It wasn't from Mexico or anything like that. And it was like that in the beginning, trying to find a source. You could find one source, and if that source dried up, you were in trouble. So that always happened. You'd have a source for a year and a half. That guy would disappear. He'd get arrested, something like that. And then you'd have to like ask around to try to dig up a new source. And there was a lot more scrutiny as far as you would be hush-hush about it.
That goes back to actually what we were talking about to begin with. That's another reason I forgot about why nobody wanted to talk about it, because you didn't want to fuck up your source.
No.
Because it was too hard to find. Sometimes it might take 6 months or a year to find it. Then when you find it, it's like, man, nobody say anything to anybody.
That's exactly right. You want to hang on to it, because if that guy got popped, you were screwed.
Yes, you're fucked.
Now people order it with a freaking credit card. Like, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
So you can have, backup sources and all these sources. And It's much more out in the open because there's not the stigma or the risk of getting arrested. Like they don't care about your personal use. If you're dealing, maybe. Because I have known guys who've gotten busted, but they were dealing
Yeah.
considerable amounts. They had a pill press, all that sort of thing. But like if you're just using it personal level, you could talk about it as much as you want now. No one cares. But back then, 10, 15 years ago, there was the real risk of prison time, of just all this stuff. Your employer, like you said, so many factors.
Being harassed about it just from not online, but just from the police. I mean, the last thing you want is, yeah, maybe they're not going to fucking put you in jail for it, but if somebody calls, you know what I'm saying, and then they have to react, you know, and with the selling, you know, it's, I don't want to say everybody was selling, you know, but I will say with pretty good degree of confidence, anybody that was taking it was probably selling enough to be able to pay for their own shit, which meant there's still that risk that was there.
Yeah, and I feel like back then the quality was a little more hit or miss because in my time I wasn't getting the pharmaceutical stuff. It was underground, and it would just be made in Joe Schmo's basement. Like you didn't know where it was coming from. Like you would know a strong guy who was getting it from somewhere, and they may or may not know the guy, and it was just real sketchy. And then towards the end of my time taking stuff, like I had like sponsorship for P.E.D.S where I was getting it free for years. Like the first shipment the guy sent me was like 20 vials of NPP, which just blew my mind. He literally is like, sent me this long email, really nice. I'm thinking the whole time, I'm like, this is completely fake. I don't believe this. Like he's saying he wants to sponsor me for P.E.D.S and I'm thinking it's bogus. I'm like, there's no way.
Yeah.
So I was real like, I don't know, you could be a cop or whatever. I was kind of going back and forth. He's like, well, what do you want to try? I'll send you something. You just test it out. I'm like, all right, whatever. So I said, I'll try out some MPP. Guy sends me 20 vials. I was like, geez, man, I thought you were going to send me 2. Like, I wasn't expecting this whole.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be great stuff, and that's what I. But the long story short is the guy's in. He got taken down by the feds eventually.
Yeah.
So that's
well, that's always, you know what I'm saying? It's how far removed can you always keep yourself? You know what I'm saying? So if somebody else goes down, you're at least one step removed that you're not the guy, to be able to go down. That's I want to say that was kind of part of the sport, but it really wasn't. But for a lot it was. But that's not really a problem now, where then I was lucky enough that when I first came into Columbus, I had a physician that was very adamant about labs, so that was, even though I hated the idea of all of it, it was just like a once a year thing, just a precautionary thing where for most people, it's like, fuck that, nobody was doing anything, where they're more open to that now, which is, I think because it's become more of the conversation, that people are seeing that maybe I ought to get my shit checked, and companies like Merrick are killing it, because they're putting the word out about that, where the only disconnect I still see with that, and I would wonder what your thoughts are on this as well, is it seems like with those people, they're notorious for waiting 8 weeks after they come off a large, blast to get the blood work done, which is to me so fucking counterproductive. It's ridiculous because they want to fool themselves into thinking that. Do you see the same thing?
I mean, I was that way back then.
Oh, were you really?
Back when I was running cycles that were years in length, I didn't want to see how bad the damage was. You wanted to bury your head in the sand. I didn't want to know. I knew it was going to be bad. I knew it was going to be messed up. So I was more ignorance is bliss kind of mindset back then. I wasn't into my health. I didn't worry about it being in my 20s. So there were very few times where I had it checked on cycle. From what I remember, the highest test level I recorded, because there's two different biomarker things for tests. They have like the LC/MS scale, which goes as high as possible. And then there's the standard one that only goes up to 1,500. Well, one time I got it checked on cycle. I think it was 750 milligrams of testosterone I was taking. I hit 3,200 nanograms per deciliter, which was the highest recorded test level for me. So that was pretty cool. But I've taken as much as 1,500 grams of test in a week, and I just never wanted to see. I didn't want to see how bad it was. Like the cholesterol, I remember LDL was around 200. So stuff was messed up. So I was in that bad mindset of like, I don't want to know. Whereas now, knowing what I know now, I think I'd want to see it. I'd want to
Yeah.
see how bad it gets.
Yes.
But
I was kind of like, I never would go when I knew it was going to be at its absolute worst, right? Because I knew the shit, because my doctor's a friend of mine now, but I knew the shit I was going to get. But I also didn't wait long enough that it was going to be good, you know? So it was, I could guess based upon what I saw, like this is on a downturn, but it's still fucked, you know? But then, you know, waiting until things kind of got in a better range, you know, before hitting it again. And this is later too. I mean, when I was competing more actively, it's the same as what you're talking about. I would skip the year. You know, like, no, I got something else going on, because it's like, fuck it. There's a meet coming out. I'm not changing shit. You know, this is just going to be what it's going to be. And they just kind of blast through the whole thing, where I don't know if all the conversation, and I don't know what really changed either, right? Because you and a few others were having these conversations for a long time. And so we can sit here and say, yeah, you guys caused the change, but that's not, something happened, because videos were being fucking demonetized. You know, people were losing accounts, you know, flat out losing their accounts for this stuff. And then I don't know what changed for people to stop losing their accounts.
I have no idea, because there was a dramatic shift in the last, I'd say, 5 years, to where it wasn't a thing. The stigma was gone. But I remember, like, Boston Lloyd was taking freaking videos of him pinning himself, showing the drugs on camera.
Yeah.
And he was the most, like, ballsy as far as that goes back in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And he got tons of his channel. You know, his channel got taken down, his Instagram, all this stuff, and he had a huge following. And he took it up a notch. Like, I would talk about it, but he was like showing it, and that was a little far at the time for.
Oh no, I get that. It's probably still be far now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, here's me pinning 3 cc's on camera. Like, people are going to be a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's been the doors have been blown open now to where no one seemingly bats an eye.
Mm-hmm.
So the stigma's completely gone.
Yeah.
Like, you go to your local gym, your Anytime Fitness, your Gold's Gym, you're going to see guys at peak hours who are on gear. It's very common.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can just look at, I'm like, that guy's on something, that guy's on something. Just regular gym goers. They don't even have to be elite athletes anymore, powerlifters, bodybuilders, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody takes stuff. It's common.
Mm-hmm.
And TRT is like, everybody does it.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're not taking TRT, you know, or if they're not taking steroids, they're at least taking TRT. Like,
well, I can make the counter argument on that even if they are blasting shit, they're going to tell you they're only doing TRT.
so everybody does.
Yeah, that is the new way to pivot, you know, around it, is to be able to say that. And I guess for the same reasons too, because if they're going to sit there and tell you what they're actually doing, all the things that we talked about before now become the issue again. You know, their sponsorships could be an issue. You know, all these other things could become an issue, where it's easy for them to say, look, man, it's just TRT. But you and I are both, you know, anybody with a clue is like, no, dude, this is not fucking 200 milligrams or 150 milligrams a test a week.
I think one of my biggest pet peeves now is seeing guys like, I mean, the majority of guys are not taking low doses. The majority.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there could be outliers out there. The freaks like a John Hack. I'm good friends with him. He has always claimed low doses. I've pressed him on it.
Mm-hmm.
I've said, you know, for real, are you serious? And he's adamant, and I have to give him the benefit of the doubt, because when I thought the guy, I've known him for going back 10 years, 15. We grew up together kind of in Wisconsin. That's how we knew each other, us and Dan Paschulk. I thought he was juicing when he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And he proved me wrong, because he went on and just blew up. So, like, someone like that who says I take low amounts, I believe him. But at the same time, I think the majority do take high amounts. Why wouldn't you see?
Mm-hmm.
I think we all have the curiosity at some point of like, okay, I'm taking 500 milligrams a test, but what's a gram going to do? What's 1,500? You want to know. You're going to try it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of it is BS as far as what people say.
Oh,
That's
I
the biggest
believe
lie.
it 100%. I also will validate what you're saying. There's been so many people over my time in the sport that a lot of them would just tell me they don't use anything. I'm like, it's bullshit. It's bullshit. And then they do. And it's like, oh shit.
Right.
Like this, I know what first cycle gains are, and what, just a good cycle difference is. This is like, oh shit. So I think that does stand to reason that, there's a reason to wait longer, for one thing. And then you probably most people don't need as much as what they think. And I do think if they got, blood work done and looked at their markers to be able to see, there's a point of diminishing returns. And I would say vastly diminishing returns, to where now your recovery is so fucked up, the training that you're doing is not really beneficial at all.
What would you say? Because I have the exact same thoughts from my experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I've pushed the envelope with doses. And one thing I noticed time and time again is as I would push the envelope, it's not like I was making better progress. So I kind of developed cutoffs in my brain of like, this is where I get the maximum benefit. And if I go past this, I'm not getting anything else. For you, what would you say, like, as far as testosterone dosage, where you saw benefits and past that, it was kind of just not there?
I always kind of joked around and said if it was me training for meet, and most of the time it was just test, D-ball. That's really about it, because even the anadrol I pulled out after a while because I always get hurt. So like test, D-ball, maybe DECA thrown in there is, the last 6 weeks I wanted to have a total, whatever I wanted to total, right? So if it was 2,200 pounds, I wanted 2,200 milligrams the last shit. I mean, how this comes about, who the fuck knows, right? But that's where I wanted it. And then the closer I got to the meet, I would lower the jabs and up the tabs, right? And that was just because the half-lives, like, what good is this going to do me after the meet? It needs to work for the meet. So anything I'm taking, like anything I'm pinning, unless it's a fast ester the last week, is for what? I just may as well take triple the orals. That way it's there, so just very simple, logical type things. But if right, and this is assuming that the stuff that I'm using is good, right? Because sometimes you don't know. This is the whole other thing that I don't know what that even means, 2,200 milligrams, because if I'm starting, a push, say 12, 16 weeks out, and then after the first 3 or 4 weeks, I don't feel like I'm snapping like I should. That explosiveness isn't there. The dose is going up because I'm assuming my shit isn't 100% real, right? So it may say 200 or 250 milligrams per cc on the bottle. It could be 100. I don't know. I'm not going to play this stupid game to try to figure it out. I just assume it's half dosed. And then when I start to feel that explosive, like, here, this is what it is, then cool, it's not changing. And then I would never pull a compound out as I was going to the meet, because what if it's the one that's working? Then I pull it out and I put something else in. To me, dumb mistake. If I'm going to put something else in, it's just going to get stacked on top. Yeah. That way that base stays in there. And I was paranoid about shit like this, dude. So if I knew I needed, say, 500 orals for the meet, I would take them all out of the bags, packs, bottles, and put it in a Ziploc bag, shake the shit out of it, and then take them that way. So if there was one bad bottle, it just diluted with all the other ones. Same thing with all the injectables. I'd take it out, put it in the 50 cc vial, and then it was all, because I've had times where I can't prove it, right? Where I think I hit a bad bottle, say 6 weeks out. And that could be, 2 weeks worth, maybe, sometimes 3. And now my training's fucked at the time I need it the most. So I tried to mitigate as much of that as I possibly could. If I felt it working, and that's the hard thing to explain, is I know when it's working, and I also know when it's too much. Like when it's too much, the lower back pumps are through the roof. The aggression is more than it should be. I can't sleep really for shit, and my recovery isn't good. The problem with that was, okay, what do I need to pull back on? That was the tricky part there. But so to me, things like that are hard to answer, especially then, because you didn't know what the real dose was.
But this is why I think that generation, compared to now, we were so much more honest. Like, we all went crazy. We all did crazy stuff, crazy cycles. Getting someone to admit that now is like pulling teeth. I can't think that everyone hitting record numbers now is just doing low dose cycles. I just don't buy it. So that transparency that we talked about, it was much more prevalent back then. There was less of us, but we were way more willing to say, yeah, we're all doing the crazy stuff. We're all taking 3 grams.
Yeah.
Like, that's what you did. And I know what you mean, because up to a meet, the last 2 weeks, it was, John jokes about it. When he was with me at Raw Unity, he's like, what are you taking? I'm like, everything I got left. Like, you use it up right before the meet. You don't know how much you're taking. You pin it all. And I would do that. And you're just trying to see, like, it was an extreme thing. You're trying to push the envelope, see where you can end up. So
that's a good point I didn't think about, because it may not have been discussed online, but offline everybody was pretty much telling everybody what the hell they were doing.
yeah.
It wasn't like a fucking secret. Like, what?
You know what it is, Dave? It's everybody wants to feel like they have superior genetics by taking less. So if the new fake natural thing is not saying I don't take anything, it's saying I take a little bit of this, and then you're putting yourself above all the other guys because you're saying I run less gear and I'm better than you.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a one-upmanship of like who can run the least amount of gear, which I'm not saying that that's healthy, but it's this like I'm not buying it.
Yeah.
And they do that to signify the superiority of their genetics over everyone else.